I'm not trying to sound like a preachy weirdo like the ones you see on the street corners, but I have seen it. Now, before all of you jump into the comments of this post I'm making, this is my own experience, and even as I speak now, I'm not even sure if I believe it myself. But now I'm just freaking out, and maybe it was an awakening. I sent this to you, my friend, to post it. I've only been alive for about 9 days. That being said, I was an atheist living the most debaucherous lifestyle. You see, I have ADHD, and so I always felt inclined toward partying and drugs, alcohol, anything to get a quick dopamine hit, all that jazz. Honestly, this is a really bad excuse, but I have other reasons to hate religion. Thank God he told me that a lot of them are wrong. A lot of them. I have a bad history with women. I would date, even married 3 of them, but I never felt like I could love anyone, so I'd leave them once I got bored. I know now that that was a terrible way to handle relationships, and as of now, I'm going to marry the first woman I actually have a good connection with and never play with hearts ever again. That is, if I ever get that chance. My current situation is not going to result in me being in a relationship anytime soon. Not after what I did. Not after what I saw. How did it all start? It's somewhat of a blur even now when I try to reflect on the moments right before the crash. That's right. This whole nightmare that I experienced, this absolute life-changing knowledge, was all because of a car crash. A car crash that I died in. I was driving along, drunk driving. God, just writing all of this down now makes me feel a little self-aware about what kind of terrible person I was. All I want now is to beg for forgiveness from everyone that I've ever wronged. Anyway, I was driving, and everything just kept spinning as I thought I could hit the pedal to the metal even harder, trying to impress my friends. I won't tell you their names because I should at least show them that respect. But one of them kept telling me that we could go faster. I kept laughing as we kept speeding along. But then everything changed in a moment. There was a guardrail at the end of the road where it turned, and I was unfamiliar with this particular street. I had no time to react. 1 second, I was gripping the wheel, the vibrations of the engine rattling my bones, my drunk mind drenched in overconfidence. And the next, I was airborne. The guardrail didn't stop me. It barely even slowed me down. The car lifted, weightless, like a bullet freed from its casing. I felt the sickening lurch of gravity abandoning me, the world outside the windshield tilting unnaturally. My stomach knotted as my vision blurred from the alcohol and sheer velocity. Then came the impact. Metal screamed. My body lurched forward as if I'd been yanked by some invisible force, the seatbelt biting into my collarbone so hard I felt something snap. Maybe a rib, maybe worse. The airbag detonated, slamming into my face with the force of a sledgehammer, momentarily obliterating everything in a white, suffocating cloud. The car rolled. Glass shattered around me in a whirlwind of jagged teeth. My left arm, flailing helplessly, caught a shard that ripped through my sleeve and into my flesh like a hot knife. Blood spattered the dashboard. I think I screamed. The world was a blender. The inside of the car a crumpling, writhing metal coffin as it tumbled down the embankment. My head cracked against the side window once, twice, before the glass gave way. My face slashed with 1,000 tiny razors. The taste of copper flooded my mouth. I didn't know if it was from my nose, my gums, or my tongue. Maybe all of them. And then silence. Not immediate. First, there was ringing. A horrible, high-pitched wail filling my skull, drowning out the wet gurgle of my own ragged breathing. The car had stopped. I was upside down. My body hung from the seatbelt, the weight of my own torso pressing against the restraint. Pain. So much pain. My chest heaved, but the air wasn't coming in right. My ribs burned with each shallow breath. I turned my head, slow, agonizing. Through the shattered windshield, I saw the world outside. A mess of twisted trees, dirt, and the hazy red glow of my taillights flickering weakly in the darkness. I should have been dead. I think part of me knew I was dead, because in the midst of all of it, the blood, the agony, the nausea creeping up my throat, I felt something else. Something watching me. Just beyond the mangled wreckage, in the shifting shadows between the trees, there was movement. Silent, subtle, wrong. I tried to focus, but my vision swam. my eyelids fluttering as consciousness threatened to slip away. My body screamed at me to stay awake, but something else, something deeper, whispered that it didn't matter, that I wasn't alone in that car, that I wasn't in my body anymore. And then, just as the darkness closed in, I saw them, the eyes, wide, empty, reflecting the dim glow of the dying headlights. And in that moment I knew I was about to learn something no living person should ever know. A sudden shock overtook me, pulling me out of the darkness I had momentarily found myself in. I looked around and saw that I was somewhere else, but I started to think about the obvious. Is this the afterlife? I wasn't fully convinced, seeing as I didn't believe in that malarkey. Turns out I was correct, but that didn't really mean I was truly correct. I was breathing. I had a heartbeat. I looked around, confused, wondering what this place was. I walked through a grassy field, looking up at the stars that hung above like majestic chandelier lights. Honestly, it was nighttime, and yet I felt as if there was still the warmth of a star bathing me in its glow. And yet, it just didn't feel quite like the real world. The grass was like walking on silk. I was naked. My body felt as fresh as a newborn child. My senses overloaded with the intake of everything around me. I couldn't see where my friends were. I wondered why I was all by myself if this was, indeed, the afterlife. But then, I felt something being carried in the wind. A voice. Are you ready for judgment? It was deep, commanding, and yet, somehow, there was a trace of compassion within it. I instantly spun around. I was half expecting to see either an angel or God himself, but I never, in my wildest dreams, expected him to look the way he did. A lot of you might think that when you see God, you'd expect something radiant, a golden light, perhaps, or maybe a massive, incomprehensible entity of wisdom and eternal, ancient existence. That last part is true. But the being that stood above me, quite a few feet above me, I might add, was not the kind of God that would make you feel at peace. He stood like a monolith, his entire head awound in the sky, vast and unblinking, a thing beyond time, beyond mercy. His robes, if they were robes, were blacker than night, shifting like oil on water, swallowing light and sound and all sense of reason. And his face, or where a face should have been, was a starburst of jagged, spiked radiance, a coronet of something sharp and holy, something that hurt to look at. This was not a God of fire and hymn, not a God of cradleside prayers. This was the God of absence, the God of silence after a name is spoken. And still he watched. What are you? I froze. You should know who I am, he said. I deemed your existence, and now that I have you and the ones you were with here at the end of temporary existence, your time for permanence is to be judged. Ha! Your name is Michael, is that correct? Yes, you have been alive for 24 years on Earth. Specifically, Earth 8,592,000,042. Wait, how many Earths are there? Did you just say there are other Earths? But of course, there are an infinite number of Earths, and I have a name for every single one of them in every single universe that I have ever created. And I have created all of them, all multiverses, all verses of reality beyond time, beyond the limits of even the most intelligent of beings. I wield them all in the palm of my hand and decide what sort of ending each one shall have. I was flabbergasted, utterly taken down to the point where I wanted to curl up into a ball and cry. So, is this like the afterlife or something? Is this heaven? No. He said that last part like I had insulted him for even suggesting that this place might be heaven. Purgatory? Hell? None of those places exist, my prodigal child. Why would I desire to punish someone with an eternal punishment for a singular bad life? What kind of concept of love do you take me for? I am justice, but I am filled with mercy for all those who are repentant. I rolled my eyes, having heard all of that in Sunday school. Well, there's a lot of religions that are getting you completely wrong. Most do. Surprisingly, I wouldn't have expected myself to have such a conversation with the Almighty. And then I asked the million-dollar question. Why do you look like something that makes me feel like I'm going to fall into an abyss? He stood there and didn't say a single word. Instead, he answered with a different statement. How I appear to you has everything to do with you. How so? I have seen you as you grew up. I know the mental issues you suffered. I saw how you struggled with that priest who took everything from you when you were younger. Fear not, he died and has been dealt with. But you went off in a different direction. And while it is regrettable and truly heartbreaking that I had to watch you be abused, we must take into account your life choices. I gave another eye roll. I still have to be judged just because I was angry at you? Because I blamed your organizations and your institutions for ruining my life? We all have to carry our own weight. Every human and species beyond that must decide for themselves how they will live. All I ask is for them to love each other as I loved you. But I cannot ignore your self-indulgence, your complete disrespect for the lives of other people. Your friends are dead now, and I'm afraid I will have to send you where I have sent them. I swallowed. He already said that there wasn't an eternal pit of fire, yet somehow I did not feel like where I was going was meant to be a good place either way. I probably should have shown more reverence, but I've always had a bit of a chip on my shoulder. I scoffed. So that's it? I live my life. I do what I want. And now suddenly I'm some irredeemable monster? Come on, I wasn't that bad. Yeah, I drank, I partied, I wasn't loyal to the girls I dated. So what? Everyone does that. We're animals, right? Just meat sacks with impulses. You made us this way, didn't you? God did not respond. I kept going, my arrogance pushing past the fear bubbling under my skin. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't torture anyone. Yeah, maybe I used people, maybe I was selfish, but I never claimed to be a saint. And besides, you let all this happen. You let priests ruin kids' lives. You let murderers walk free. You let me be the way I was. And now you want to act like I should have done better. Still, he said nothing. I threw up my arms. You know what? Maybe you should be judging yourself. What kind of merciful being lets the world go to rot while sitting on some throne beyond time? You could have told me the rules, you could have shown yourself instead of leaving us all to guess what's right and what's wrong. His silence wasn't out of ignorance. It was the silence of a parent watching a child throw a tantrum, waiting for the inevitable moment when the screaming stops and the reality sinks in. And then, without moving, without sound, I understood. Why do you look like this? I whispered, the anger draining from my voice. And then he spoke. Because this is how you always saw me. I shouldn't have to tell you to just be a good person and treat people with respect. The moment he said it, my mind reeled. Every argument I had ever made against him, every time I scoffed at religion, every time I had cursed his name, it all flashed before my eyes. I had imagined him as something cruel, distant, terrifying, a thing beyond reason, a cosmic force indifferent to suffering. And so that was what he became to me. Your perception is your judgment, Michael. You lived your life convinced that I was a void. So now, a void is all I can be for you. Before I could react, I felt my feet leave the ground. Some unseen force pulled me upward, higher, closer to that gaping wound where his face should have been. My limbs flailed, but there was no resisting it. The air around me turned to ice, my breath stolen from my lungs as the gravity of his form swallowed me whole. Then I fell. It wasn't like crashing through the air, screaming as the earth rushes to meet you. No, this was worse. This was plummeting without end, without direction. My body contorted as I spiraled into the abyss beyond his form. And then the pain began. My flesh peeled from my bones, decaying in an instant. My skin blackened, rotting as it sloughed off in wet chunks. My arms twisted, bones snapping, reforming into something grotesque. But I was still there. I was still in it. I felt every nerve burn, every muscle collapse, every sinew unravel. And yet I did not die. I did not die. When I hit the ground, if it could even be called a ground, I landed in a sea of bodies. They writhed, decayed and broken. A mass of rotting people all screaming in agony. Some had no faces. Some had too many. Limbs jutted out at impossible angles. Flesh sloughing off in viscous drips. The air reeked of decay and sulfur, choking the senses, making it impossible to think. Above us, stretching forever, was the sky, if it could even be called that. It churned, a shifting void of darkness and something worse. And ahead of all of us, as we were being forced forward by new people being brought in, the pit, a vast, blazing maw that dominated the end. A fire not of warmth but of erasure. It was not a place of suffering, it was a place of ending. A place where existence itself was snuffed out, where the self was atomized, erased, forgotten. And we were all heading toward it, pushed without the ability to turn back. Slowly, agonizingly, it would take years to reach. Years of pain, rot, and horror before the final release. A hand clutched at my arm, the fingers like gnarled roots. I turned and my stomach dropped. It was them, my friends, or what was left of them. Their hollow eyes burned with hatred, their mouths twisted in misery. "This is your fault, Michael," one of them rasped, their voice like tearing paper. "You brought us here. You killed us." I opened my mouth to respond, but there was nothing I could say, because they were right. The pain never stopped. It evolved. At first, it was the raw, visceral agony of having my flesh slew off my bones, of muscles twisting into knots only to unravel into a weeping rot. Every nerve in my body screamed in ways I didn't know were possible. It wasn't just pain. It was sensation beyond pain. Something deeper. Something so profoundly wrong that my mind could barely comprehend it. Then came the next stage. The bones. My skeleton had never felt pain before, not really. But now, as I shuffled forward with the rest, the marrow in my bones felt like it was boiling. I felt them splinter inside me, shards shifting, grinding, scraping against each other like shattered glass. My spine twisted, then cracked, bending me forward into a shape that wasn't human anymore. And the worst part? I could not die. I could not go numb. The agony remained fresh, renewed with every step, new ways of suffering created with every passing second. The smell of burning flesh and sulfur was everywhere, thick, choking. It filled my decayed lungs, making it impossible to breathe properly. Not that breath mattered anymore. We were walking toward the source, toward that blazing maw that would end us completely. The closer we got, the hotter it became. My rotting skin bubbled, my exposed bones cracked. The air peeled away the idea of existence itself. But even worse than the pain was them. "This is your fault. You killed us. You selfish, arrogant piece of crap." Their voices, their hatred, surrounded me. My friends, the ones who had died with me, the ones who had been ripped out of life because of my stupidity, my recklessness, my need to be above it all. They were with me in this suffering, and they despised me for it. One of them, his face almost melted away, grabbed me by the throat with fingers like brittle twigs, snapping yet somehow still holding on. His eyes were gone, empty sockets filled with something worse than darkness. "Why?" His voice was a guttural rasp, wet and raw. "Why did you do this to us?" I struggled against his grip. It wasn't my fault. I didn't force you to get in the car. You chose to ride with me." Another hand clawed at me. Another friend, her jaw unhinged, her mouth an empty, gaping hole. "We were drunk. We trusted you. You could have stopped." Another voice. "You laughed when you hit the gas. You knew it was stupid." The crowd of corpses that once were my friends descended on me. They tore at my flesh, even though there was barely anything left. Their nails, jagged and split, raked across my exposed bones. My ribs caved. My fingers snapped backward as I tried to push them off. I screamed, but no one cared. No one could care. Not here. And suddenly, it hit me. They weren't here because of me. They were here because of them. Just like I was here because of me. We all made our own choices. I choked out, struggling to speak through the suffering. I was responsible for getting them killed, but not for how they lived. Just like I'm accountable for how I lived. They stopped clawing at me. For a moment, there was silence. Then, laughter. Broken. Bitter. "And now we pay for it," one of them whispered. The shuffle continued. The crowd pressed forward, marching toward annihilation. Toward the lake of fire and sulfur. I felt it now. The heat. The impossible, unbearable heat. Even from this distance, It melted what little was left of my flesh. The ground beneath us turned to something viscous, black and bubbling, swallowing our feet with each step, pulling us down. I turned my gaze upward, toward the void above, toward the God that had condemned me. "Please," I croaked. My throat was dry, raw, shredded. "Please, give me another chance." There was no response. I fell to my knees. I was wrong. I was so wrong. The crowd was pushed forward, past me, around me, uncaring. I did see a few others who prayed. I was arrogant. I thought I knew everything. I thought I was above it all. I thought I could do whatever I wanted without consequence. I clenched my hands together, what remained of them, and lowered my head. "I'm sorry," I sobbed, a dry, broken sound. "I don't want to be erased. Please, please." Years passed. Those who prayed and begged quit after many years passed. But I kept begging. I walked forcefully forward like everyone else. I begged. I prayed. For the first time in my entire existence, I prayed. I believed. And still, the lake of fire grew closer. I watched as the first wicked ones reached it. They did not burn. They did not scream. They simply disappeared, snuffed out. Their forms collapsed into dust, atomized in an instant, wiped away from everything. I reached the edge. I saw the nothingness waiting to devour me. I felt my feet leave the ground, felt the final pull into oblivion. And I screamed, "Please, I believe in you. I love you. I trust you. Give me a second chance. I know I was wrong. I know I deserve this. But please, I beg you." Silence. The heat licked at my feet. The moment was here. This was it. And then, "You will get your second chance, Michael." The voice was not cruel, not cold, not indifferent. It was a whisper of mercy. And then, just as I was about to fall into the abyss, I was yanked back. The fire, the darkness, the pain, gone. My eyes snapped open. I was on my back. Asphalt beneath me. The air was cold, real, thick in my lungs. I gasped. Lights flashed above me. Sirens. Voices. I was in the wreckage of my car. The paramedics were pulling me out. I was alive. I was back. I don't know how to end this, really. There's no perfect way to wrap up something like this. No clever last line that makes it all make sense. I guess I should start with the obvious. I'm in legal trouble. They got me for DUI, reckless endangerment, and involuntary manslaughter. 3 people died because of me. My friends. Their families, God, their families will never get them back. And nothing I do can change that. No amount of belief, no amount of faith, no amount of begging God for another chance will bring them back. But He still gave me one. And I'll never understand why. I'm going to prison, probably for a long time. And I accept that. I won't fight it, won't try to argue my way out. This is where I belong. This is the weight I have to carry, and I will carry it. But I won't rot away in a cell. I won't sit there, blaming the world, blaming God, blaming everyone but myself. I was that person once. That person is dead. I believe now. I know that I was given this second chance to do something, to be something, and I know what that is. I'm going to help others in there. I'm going to reach out to them. People like me, people who have made mistakes, people who think they're beyond saving. I'll tell them the truth, whether they believe me or not, because some of them are on the same path I was, and I know where it leads. I've seen where it leads. I can still feel the heat when I close my eyes. I can still hear the screams. I know some of you reading this won't believe me. You'll call me a liar, a fraud, a man trying to escape his guilt by making up a grand story. That's fine. You don't have to believe me, but I need you to listen to one thing, because this isn't about me. This is about you. You still have time. You still have a choice. But someday you won't. And when that day comes, you will see what I saw.